One of the world's most popular social media platforms, TikTok, could pose a national security threat. This, according to the FBI and many lawmakers in the United States. Now, TikTok is a massively popular app, accumulating 1 billion users in just about 5 years, but it's owned by a Chinese company, and that's what has national security officials and lawmakers so worried. Several states have moved to ban the app from government devices entirely, and the U.S. Senate unanimously approved a bill to ban it from federal devices too. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada's electronic spy agency is watching the app, quote, very carefully. Dennis Molinaro is a professor of legal studies at Ontario Tech University. He previously worked as a national security analyst with the federal government. Professor Molinaro is in Oshawa, Ontario. Well, Professor, TikTok, it's under a lot of scrutiny in Canada, the U.S., and Europe over national security concerns, and some U.S. states have already moved to ban it from government devices. What's the big concern that you see here?
I think the big concern is really focused on the data. Essentially, where is the data stored and who has access to that data? So that's the major concern. Is the data that's hosted and stored in the United States, does the Communist Party and China essentially have access to that data because ByteDance is a PRC-based company?
Right, so data is a common concern with big social media companies because they have massive amounts of data on their users, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, Google, whoever. I mean, why are the concerns appear to be more urgent when it comes to TikTok? Is it strictly this link to China?
It's mainly the link to China, I would say, because really China has a suite of laws concerning national security that it passed since 2018 that really can compel a company to assist the Chinese state in intelligence operations, collections, whatever it wants. So it can compel individuals and companies to assist it. And so I guess the primary concern then is if China has access to the data of North Americans from using this app, what it could potentially do with that data is concerning.
So let's walk through some of the potential uses for that data if we can, because we see headlines about foreign interference and meddling in elections. You know, we see China focusing on dissidents living abroad. I mean, what are some of the things that TikTok data could be used for that would be of concern?
Well, you've kind of captured it in that statement. I mean, it can be used for a variety of operations that the Chinese state could engage in. So if it was interested in, let's say, targeting specific individuals to engage in some type of campaigns of influence or what have you, I mean, it's a lot of data that it can collect, right? And then it could use its own algorithms, its own analysis processes to kind of aggregate that data and find out more about individuals, their views, their political views, their patterns of life, things they do. And effectively target them for more specific operations. But it could also be used in other ways. You mentioned about influence of communities. I mean, we've seen the Chinese state be able to control information through social media, like on its WeChat app, for instance, where it could essentially, censor information. And we know already from social media, other types of social media like Google or like Facebook that can, subtly introduce information stories that it thinks you might be interested in. And so we could see essentially the Chinese state using TikTok to try to manipulate people's views, conduct disinformation campaigns, specifically against the Chinese Canadian community.
So it's not just a data concern. If you're getting into misinformation, for example, we're talking about content here, right? I mean, most of the TikTok I see are silly, funny videos that makes its way to me through Twitter or Facebook or other things, but there's a more urgent concern you have there about the content itself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the content itself could be tailored and manipulated essentially and pushed towards individuals. And that's another big concern, along with the data and who has access to it and what it could potentially be used for.
Right, because they can put their thumb on the scale for the algorithm to upvote, for lack of a better term, things that maybe represents the view of the Chinese government and put that into heavier circulation than, say, criticism of China.
Absolutely, it could do that. It could also engage in terms of, it can use it as a form of electoral interference, and especially during an election period, by trying to target individuals and their views and manipulate them through different algorithms that it could create.
So we've heard from the Prime Minister on this, Justin Trudeau, saying that Canada's electronic spy agency is watching TikTok very carefully, in his words. Is watching it good enough from your perspective? What do you think the Canadian government needs to do here?
I don't think really watching is a good enough word. I think Canada needs to be taking more action on this. I mean, Canada is its own state. It doesn't necessarily need to watch the US to see what it is doing. It has its own information, and it has intelligence likely shared from the United States as well, if need be. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that Canada could be doing right now. And one thing that I think easily could be done is for the Canadian government to flat out just say that this type of app is not permitted on government devices. I mean, that's a very easy thing the government can do right now.
So you've outlined the concerns with access to data and also content manipulation. Is there a special acute risk to it being on a government device that makes it an extra security threat?
I think so. I mean, when you're talking about individuals in government, it would be advantageous to a foreign state, an adversarial state, to essentially try to find people in government and in various positions in government and try to target their devices. And because they might be after a specific goal, for instance, that might be more espionage related, and that's a more serious concern. So I think Canada could be proactive here, and I definitely don't think it's going to be offending its allies if it makes a statement that Canada will not allow this app on government devices until more information comes out that could essentially clear it of any wrongdoing. But for now, I think that would be a prudent step, because if Canada is just watching, the fear and the danger is that states like China could be acting while we're watching.
The risk is pretty clear there for government, but for the audience at home who might be users of TikTok or have family members or children, let's face it, teenagers who use the app, what's your advice to them?
I think the main advice I have would be check what permissions the app has, because you can at least mitigate, and take some more precautions for yourself in terms of keeping your data safe if you just go into the permissions sections of your phone and find out what permissions the app has been given, because you'll often find it doesn't need the types of permissions that it's been granted by default. So you can turn those off if they're too invasive. At the very minimum, I think that's a prudent, precautious thing to do.
Okay, Dennis Molinaro, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.